I'm going to just touch on a few highlights that kind of add to both what Virginia said and what Holly has provided you information about, and then get more into one of the reasons that I'm here today as the independent reviewer, and to reintroduce you to Lois Curtis, who is handing President Obama one of her paintings. And this was during a Olmstead celebration back over 10 years ago. So there have really been three different pieces of federal legislation, or one court decision and two pieces of legislation over a 30 plus year period, almost 30-year period, to show you how the arc of change takes a long time on the legislative side, as well as on the side of where we all work, where people live. And those decisions at the federal level open doors for so many people, as we've been talking about already today. I found two quotes from Olmstead that I think are really important about where we came from, because one of the reasons why these decisions and acts were so important is that people were living in institutions, large institutions, with no opportunity to move to the community. And here you see two quotes from Ruth Bader Ginsburg regarding these institutional placements. I should have said at the beginning, I'm actually a white woman wearing a white top in my 70s. So I worked back in these institutions before the Rehab Act, before the ADA, and before the Olmstead decision. And every time one of these decisions got made, I was bursting with energy, along with a lot of other advocates, about what was possible for the future. But our journey, as we know, has opened doors for some people, but not all at once, and not without the hard-fought battles that continue today. Our battles today may be somewhat different than they were back in 1990 or back in 1973. For example, what about the waiting list? When I started this work, we didn't have waiting lists because we didn't have anyone waiting yet. And today, that's one of the big battles that is different than where we came from. The Olmstead decision focuses on state responsibilities, because state policy dictates the expenditures, how federal funds are used and allocated, and what our program priorities are going to be. That's why a state is important. And because the two women, Elaine Wilson and Lois Curtis, were not offered initially an opportunity to move to the community, that was a state decision. That's why the focus on states in the Olmstead decision. But going back to 504, which was passed in the Rehab Act, back in 1973, the federal government was basically saying a person cannot be excluded from participation in or denied benefits with activities funded with federal assistance distributed by state and local government or any other instrumentality. And this is really important. What is an instrumentality? It's a private provider. It's a housing provider. It's anyone funded or provided resources from the state or federal government. That's a wide group of people, organizations, and places. So since the ADA 504 in Olmstead, the federal and instrumentalities, we followed the lead of families, disability rights, legal organizations, and activists, philanthropy, researchers, progressive educators, and provider groups have led the way, sometimes together, sometimes separately, towards realizing the potential of these hard-fought legal battles. They've taken more progressive steps to transform systems, change regulations, payment priorities, and services. A lot has happened all across the country to take these progressive steps. Perhaps maybe one of the most successful steps was when President Obama issued an executive order in 2009. And remember, Olmstead passed and became a law in 1999, and the ADA was in 1990, and the Rehab Act was in 1973. All the way to 2009, he directed federal agencies to take action to implement Olmstead. And the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services did that. The Department of Labor, HUD, the Housing and Urban Development, and the U.S. Department of Justice began issuing policy and being more active, investigating complaints about Olmstead not being enacted, and has now taken legal action all across the country. Sadly, legal actions are still necessary and in process across the country. I think most of us would hope that the steps that we could take to implement these laws and this decision could come through our own action without and progressive steps rather than legal actions that take a long time to bring and a long time to come to fruition. But sadly, we are still there. It hasn't been a straight line, as I just said. We have special interest groups that are still opposed to change. Sometimes it has to do with their employment in institutions. Sometimes it has to do with contracts you have to keep institutions open. There are various different reasons why it's not a straight line. Sometimes in government would say, wait a minute, the federal government can't tell us what to do. Even though it is the law of the land, sometimes there are competing priorities that states must weigh to determine what they're going to fund, what's a priority. And I think one of the things that's really important, and Holly said this, that in the Olmstead decision, there was a recognition that sometimes moving quickly to dismantle an institutional system means that it makes it hard for the state to actually fund that. That's not been successful in court, by the way. I just wanted to make that clear to everyone, is that there is a way to fund community-based options while not necessarily closing or not funding institutional options. But you have to set a priority and you have to be smart about doing it. For housing, services, employment, all are underfunded in most states today. We're going to need more resources, but it can't be an either or, and it doesn't have to be an either or. And some states have already shown that. Sometimes there's a lack of support for integration and community inclusion across the board. Not for folks on this call, you're all here today to learn more about what you can do. There's sometimes misinformation about, what's required or what we can do. And sometimes it's because people continue to see a person's disability, not their ability and their will. And there hasn't been a straight line because the struggle comes from the negative impact of being a subject to long-term institutionalization, where loneliness sets in and fear sets in. So you have to be thoughtful about what services and supports to provide. So I think some folks on the call today want to say, okay, so you're the independent reviewer in this settlement agreement. What does that mean? What was the state required to do? The state was required to enter into this agreement after an investigation, first led by Disability Rights North Carolina, reaching out to the Department of Justice, because they had steered thousands of adults with serious mental illness into adult care homes And they had been doing that, the state had been doing that for decades. There were findings that people being discharged from state psychiatric hospitals were moving to unstable housing, not providing a pathway for individuals to return to the community or be diverted from adult care homes, or to provide an integrated recovery-based system, including services, peer support, supported housing, and supported employment. Those were the findings. The agreement, and by the way, there are 103 requirements in this agreement. It's very comprehensive, one of the most comprehensive agreements in the country, to support 3,000 people to live in supported housing in the community from the target population identified in the agreement. 2,000 of those individuals must be individuals who had been previously living in adult care homes. The state's required to provide in-reach and transition and discharge to help people move, and pre-screening for people who can be diverted from moving to adult care homes, to create a community-based, recovery-based system at the intensity and frequency for individuals to move to and to live successfully in the community with their rights of tenancy, if they're in a rental agreement, and to get tenancy support, to provide supported employment with fidelity to an evidence-based model. That means, in plain language, provide supported employment in a way that works, with evidence that it works, and then to develop a QA/PI system to make sure that these requirements are being met. So we're 10 years after entering the agreement. The state has met compliance on two major requirements. On April 30th of this year, over 3,000 people were living in supported housing. There's a caveat, though, to that achievement, because only 1,205 people have moved from adult care homes, falling short of that requirement for 2,000. The state has reduced the number of people moving into adult care homes. When I came on as the reviewer in this case, over 900 people were moving to adult care homes every year because they didn't have any other choice. That has come down to less than 65 last year, fiscal year. And at the end of April this year, only 61 people had moved to adult care homes. In other words, we're not growing the problem anymore. The problem's being reduced. And the state has created a viable rental assistance program. And for all of you on this call today, I would say to you that that viable rental assistance program can work successfully for individuals across all of the disability groups. It doesn't have to be just for people in TCL. You can see to the right there is a new multifamily rental project that has a set aside units for people who are of all disability groups in Swannanoa, North Carolina, that just won an award, a national award. Some challenges. The IPS system isn't where it needs to be yet. Only less than 20% of individuals who could already said they want employment or education are actually referred to get it. The services are not consistently provided to the required evidence-based recovery model and required tenancy support. However, for some folks in some communities, working with a couple of the LMEs, I can say are showing real promise to help people live successfully in the community. And we still got systems changes, workforce issues, and COVID that created delays and new challenges. The state is providing funding for more bridge housing and crisis residences, enabling individuals to help make their transition successful. This is really important for people being discharged from state psychiatric hospitals. Got a new complex care initiative showing promising results for individuals with medical challenges and physical disabilities, new peer-led bridger services, and LME MCOs taking on more responsibility, working with property managers and peers to take advantage of new housing options that are on the horizon. You've seen a couple of slides with pictures from the creative renovations in Columbus, Ohio, and creative housing. And I am hopeful that this state will continue to make progress with the hope and vision that we all need and aspire to have for our fellow residents of the state of North Carolina, with able individuals, I should say.